this was also payback for the meeting where I read the riot act to them for being silent on COVID and told them that they turned into the party of principle and they ought to disband right now. And they didn't like me saying that. And all the same people that voted against actually doing something or COVID, the same ones who tried to remove me. It was all just payback for calling out the National Party on that. And then this thing, because I won't be silent about the failings of the National Party.
All right, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today I have a very special guest. Some of you may know her, some of you may not. She is the secretary of the Libertarian Party National, and she is our Pink Flame of Liberty, Caryn Ann Harlos. Welcome.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
So I'm actually fairly new to the party. I just actually joined recently, but I'm not new to libertarian politics. I'm not new to libertarian values. So for the first thing I really want to kind of get is, how long have you been a member and how long have you been on the executive committee?
Okay, you're going to be able to tell right away I'm autistic because I know the exact date. I registered Libertarian September 17th, 2014. And I got on the LNC first as Region 1 representative at convention in 2016, which would have been May-ish. So around May 2016, I was elected regional representative, served for 2 years. And then in 2018 was elected to my first term as secretary, and I'm now on my second term as secretary.
Okay. And what side of the aisle were you on before you moved over?
None. I didn't vote really. Like, I would vote probably I was like a Christmas and Easter like type voter. Like, I would vote in the presidential elections only because I'm like so superficial, because I wanted the stupid sticker, which I have a bunch of them on my wall. I'm so stupid like that. And to get off of work, I didn't really care. To be honest with you, I used to take great pleasure in Florida. We had some mail-in, but they would also send us the like sample ballots, and I used to take great pleasure in just throwing them out, though I did retrieve the Gore one with the hanging Chad, because that's going to be worth money someday. But yeah, no, but I was registered Republican. But to say I was a Republican would be a stretch. It was mostly because my church, like the church I went to, when you accepted Jesus, you also accepted the Republican Party. That's just how it was. I was a Democrat before then. And it didn't mean anything. Yeah. So technically a Republican, but in reality,
Okay.
nothing.
So you've been on the Democrat side, you've been on the Republican side, and now you're actually deeply involved in libertarian politics. So what changed for you then?
I read the platform. That's
Okay.
That's the only thing that made me change, is I read the platform. One lunch break, I read the platform and immediately switched my voter registration. My husband was out getting lunch, and he kind of comes back and he said, I said, hey, I switched my voter registration. And his little words were, to what? You don't even vote. And yeah, that's how it all started.
So then what made you want to get involved as much as you have? Obviously, I mean, being on the LNC and everything, it's quite a step from not being anything in 2014 to going full out and being very involved.
It is. And it's a long story. That's almost as silly as this wanting to vote for the sticker. I only joined the National Party because there was an ad on Facebook that where they said they'd give you a free t-shirt. And I wanted that shirt bad. So yeah, I joined. And when they called and asked me, I said, because I wanted the shirt. But I moved to Colorado from Florida. And I worked from home in Colorado because I kept my Florida job. And you don't realize how many people you meet through work or church. And I was here for a while and still didn't know anybody. And my husband kept saying, you know, you need to get involved. You need to meet people, though he regrets that really now. So I was just looking for something to do. And I got involved with the local, with the Colorado party, helping them with their social media. And things just got out of hand from there.
Yeah, I can see that. And social media kind of tends to do that to us. That's kind of how it brought me in. And I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago on Clubhouse real quick. And that's actually why I wanted to bring you on, especially
Mm.
because we were having a great conversation. But um, Clubhouse is one of the things where it's like you want to give other people time, especially to ask somebody
Yeah.
like you questions and everything like that. But I mean, I was just telling Ryan Graham that I wasn't part of the party a few weeks ago or a few months ago, maybe. I wasn't part of the party because I thought libertarianism, like being part of a party, almost went against my libertarian values, right? You don't
Mm.
want to be tied to something like a party where you want to be kind of free to be able to make choices based on the candidates that you see fit. So, but then New Hampshire obviously happened, and that changed a lot of things. So for better or for worse, I mean, that made you probably one of the most popular people in the party, you know. But it made me realize that if I want to make changes in this party, I have to be in the party. So that's why I did it. And I also think Ryan's doing great things down here. But it was kind of ironic that everything there happened, and um it completely changed my whole stances on the way that liberty work, you know, how we can be shaping this party into everything. So
And
so
they're actually, and it ties into New Hampshire, which is kind of funny. So, I got very involved with Colorado, and I'm always a history buff, and no matter what I do. So I started getting into a lot of the party history. And I learned about something that happened in Oregon where the National Committee really, really interfered in Oregon. And at that point, I was very, very protective of Colorado. The whole reason I got on the LNC to begin with was to protect Colorado from the National Committee. And that's why I got as regional representative. So I'd be directly representing Western states, including Colorado. And that's always kind of been my view. I've never trusted the LNC. I never became part of the machinery. I always viewed it almost like a necessary evil in some way, and though now I'm beginning to question whether it's even necessary. And so my view has always been distrust towards hierarchy and the hierarchy within the party. And it's funny that now, however many terms later, my whole purpose for getting on the LNC was to protect states from national, and that is what actually happened in New Hampshire. And I even told the people in New Hampshire, and standing up for you guys, I was protecting Colorado by proxy, because if it happened to you, it could happen to Colorado. And
yep.
it's funny, yeah, it's come full circle that I actually fulfilled the very reason why I got on the national committee to begin with. And it's also funny, I dropped something where you said, oh, that made you like a popular person in the party. It depends on who you ask. The LNC hates my guts.
Oh yeah.
But I say I don't mind being hated by all the right people.
Well, I thought it was kind of ironic, and I know you had mentioned that you ran on a platform of being rooting out of being a whistleblowers and protection and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to watch the party that wants to, free Edward Snowden and Julian Assange wants to come after you and basically take you off the board for doing just that.
Yeah, because there was corruption last term. There was a group of us actually calling out corruption last term that Nick Sarwark named was it the Notorious Nine? It was actually 10 of us. I don't know how he got 9. He counted, I think, regional and their alternate as one person. And
Well,
I
he's
was
not
part
very
of the
smart.
Notorious Nine. And so at the time I re-ran, there was already a big split on the LNC between people who were calling out corruption and those who would not. So people are wondering why, like, how did that platform even come up that you would run on it? Because I was in the middle of doing just that then. So it's so funny now how, people want to remove me for doing what I promised, and how the fellow Notorious Nine members are no longer whistleblowers. They're part of the crew trying to throw me off.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, that's I've heard other people that used to be part of the party say, the Libertarian Party has the same problems as the two major parties without the advantage of winning elections, which is true on the national level, not so true on the local levels anymore. We're starting to gain on local levels and all that. but it really, it absolutely is completely interesting. And I had, like I said, I kind of even just got turned on to the party during the 2016 election. Though I didn't vote for Gary Johnson because everything that he was so bad at. But that's kind of what brought me over. And then I started learning more about Nick and everything like that. And I had just, like I said, I had just had Ryan Graham on, and I told him, you guys just got over this PR nightmare that was Nick's our work. And now it seems, and it seems like everything's calming down. And then New Hampshire happened, where it was like, the same stuff. It was just this big party politics that and a lot of corruption. You want to kind of explain what happened in New Hampshire? Because I don't know if everybody in my audience knows.
And yeah, to me, it's fairly obvious. There's some facts that aren't yet determined, but you can draw a lot of very, very reasonable inferences from the things that we do know. So God, it's so hard to like even back up because there's so many moving parts. And it stems back to Nick, actually, because originally, because Nick's in New Hampshire, which is a whole other thing. But the Mises Caucus, which is a caucus within the Libertarian Party, that's very much the Ron Paul revolution, kind of like the next generation of that, which is very much at odds with Nick, and the people who are very popular in the Mises Caucus, such as Tom Woods, Jeff Deist, the Mises Institute, Dave Smith. Nick Sarwark had decided it was his job as chair to start attacking other libertarians, those people. So it turned into this big battle. And the Mises Caucus has a goal, like all caucuses do. They don't lie, Pinocchio. They all do. They're just, the Mises Caucus is open about it and used rhetoric that a lot of people didn't like, saying they're going to take over the party. But if you ask them what they meant by it, it just meant winning at their particular agenda, which is what all caucuses want to do, period. They just might not be as forthright about it. And I find it really funny when the Radical Caucus gets all upset at the Mises Caucus, because the Radical Caucus, their goal is to re-radicalize the party. How is that any different? The rhetoric is the same. And the Mises Caucus, though, is successful, unlike the Radical Caucus. And they won. They did a clean sweep of the board in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire was kind of a woke stronghold of the Nick Sarwark variety. So was Nevada. They also took over. They also did a clean sweep of the board in Nevada. And however, the chair of New Hampshire was not a Mises person. The Mises people took the attitude that they were going to extend the olive branches to those who weren't hostile, but weren't Mises people, by electing some non-Mises people to the board as long as they felt they could work with them. And the chair of New Hampshire was one of those people, Joletta Jarvis, who is a good friend of mine. I don't know if she would still consider me a good friend. I still consider her one. And but Joletta was easily influenced, and people who weren't happy about what happened with the Mises Caucus, and Joletta wasn't happy with some of the messaging of the Mises Caucus, got to her, and she was ready to resign because she felt she couldn't manage this board, that she was too at odds with the board. And someone had said to her, you don't need to resign, there's another way, and basically arranged a coup of the New Hampshire party, where she just basically said, you know, I'm taking the party and moving it to a whole other board, and just forget you guys. I'm like forming another parallel New Hampshire party with new bylaws, new membership requirements, and got a letter from the national chair basically saying this weird language: the party of which you are chair is the legitimate affiliate of the national LP. And she goes, see, this is the transfer of affiliation from the old New Hampshire party to the chair of, you know, to this one. And Joe, the national chair, never denied that that's what that letter did. He just got all upset and like deflected. And she said he knew perfectly well what he was going to use that letter for, which she was going to use that letter for. She published it and said that's what it was for. He never came out and said, whoa, you know, I gave you that letter for another purpose. And and the National Party basically allowed her to just abscond with the database, which political parties live and die on data. And she was claiming they were the party now. And she even said to me, you know, if convention were tomorrow, no, you'd be seating delegates from my party, not this other party that was the one that elected the Mises people. So it was basically the national chair aiding a complete, you know, transfer of affiliation. And that's just not how it works. And he of course never denied that. And I later found out that the letter, he made it seem like she called him and asked him for this letter. It was a routine thing. He assumed it was in order to get control of the Twitter account, which happens. Sometimes chairs lose control of a volunteer and they need to give Twitter some documentation to prove that they're the legitimate owner. And it turned out that isn't what it was for. And we found out, though, that Gilletta never asked him for that letter. So his story makes no sense. An out-of-state person who I don't know the identity of yet called Joe and asked him for this letter. It wasn't even somebody from New Hampshire. It wasn't even somebody who had anything to do with the New Hampshire party. So Joe knew what was going on. This completely uninvolved person asked him for this letter. Gilletta said she hadn't talked to him in over a month, and he led the LNC to believe they were talking all the time. And with it being an out-of-state person, it then all of a sudden becomes not just strictly some kind of internal New Hampshire squabble, which was bad enough. It makes it look like a coordinated, well, we're going to try this on New Hampshire because we're not happy. And if it works in New Hampshire, then yeah, probably Nevada, and then probably Colorado, because we also had a clean sweep of our board. And I already started seeing signs of setups being happened here. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. And the day she published this letter and saying, I'm the new party now, basically, I was in Florida acting as their parliamentarian. I saw this come across and I didn't know what happened. I knew Gilletta. I didn't know any of, and if I did, it was very casually. I couldn't have named or pointed out. The expression I like to use is, point out in a lineup and people going, that's an interesting, don't take any, I always use that. I say that about everything. I couldn't point you out in a lineup. I didn't know any of the Mises people. So I said, well, I got to figure out what's going on here because this looks like another Oregon, which I'm always on the lookout for. And that night I got on Zoom with and interviewed all the people I could find, Gilletta, and recorded it, and all the Mises people. And apparently Joe didn't coordinate the stories well enough with Gilletta, and it all came out. Like what actually happened came out. And that wasn't planned on by the conspirators or whatever you want to call it of this whole thing. I think what they counted on was institutional inertia, and it was already happening even within 2 days. Everyone throwing up their hands going, well, we can't figure it out. Let New Hampshire sort it out, as if the National Party didn't set this whole thing up. Oh, this is just some internal state thing. Let them figure it out. No, it was provoked by somebody out of state colluding with the national chair to take over the New Hampshire party. And my getting on these interviews right away is what blew the whole thing up. And nobody had time to organize their stories. And that's what made me the most hated person on the LNC, and very heroic with some other people. Though I hope I just did what most people would do. I just happened to have the time to do it. It wasn't like there was something special about me. I had happened to have just quit my job. So I had a lot of free time. And if I hadn't quit my job that week, I wouldn't have had time to do those interviews. I would have been in my hotel room catching up on work. So just everything aligned where I could take the role I did. It wasn't anything particularly special about me. And the funny thing is, there were other LNC members in the room with me at the time of those interviews, but I was the only one singled out for the vitriol because I pursued it and wouldn't drop it and called it what it was. Like, I don't pussyfoot around. I'm like, nope, this is corruption. Yep. And and I just kept going after it. And eventually myself and Joshua Smith.
Yep.
Joshua, not as much because, again, he has a bunch of kids to take care of. He didn't have the time. Wasn't that I was more special than Joshua? It's just I had the time. And between the two of us, it led to the pressure that led to Henchman resigning, which is a good thing that he did, because the LNC never would have removed him. They would have just swept it under the rug. And then they tried to remove me, and they were going to go after Joshua next. It's funny, they never would have removed the national chair, but they came close to removing the whistleblower.
Exactly.
That's
absolutely crazy. And when stuff started coming out, it was, as a former Army officer that used to do investigations and stuff too, I looked at it, I'm like, so either JBH was incompetent when he signed that letter because he didn't ask what it was for, or he knew exactly what was going on. So it was one of the two, and neither one looked good for him. So I watched the LNC meeting when you guys were all voting on that, and it was ironic because you brought this up too, because they wanted to oust you for decorum and all this other stuff, and so it was interesting because you've said this to me before, is they've said so much worse to you than what you've said, even just broad statements, right?
And the things they object to, I say in my personal life, like I don't, at a meeting, I've never screamed at anybody. I've never cussed. Other people have quite frequently. I've never showed up to a meeting intoxicated, which other people have done. That meeting where the same night that Richard Longstreth was penning the motion, he shrieked at me at that meeting. So yeah, it is quite ironic. It's physician, heal thyself. And they just didn't like that I had opinions on the LNC. I always refused to circle the wagons. I refused to keep things secret. And this was not just payback for, there's another meeting that I'm going to rebroadcast my speech from it, because this was also payback for the meeting where I read the riot act to them for being silent on COVID and told them that they turned into the party of principle and they ought to disband right now. And they didn't like me saying that. And all the same people that voted against actually doing something on COVID, the same ones who tried to remove me. It was all just payback for calling out the National Party on that. And then this thing, because I won't be silent about the failings of the National Party. And I never have been. People think this is a new thing. I started doing this in 2016. I brought up when Nick signed this contract with the Gary Johnson campaign that had a clause in it that was to be kept secret from the membership forever, not for a period of time to protect the campaign, whatever. I could get that. No, forever. And as an LNC member, I knew what it said. It was stupid. It was just lawyers just being lawyers. But I was like, no. And, these battles are absolutely nothing new. And it's because I didn't join the LNC for the title. I didn't join it for like this, whatever kind of LP glory there is. I joined it because I didn't trust it. And I've always had that attitude. And Joe, actually, I need to find the email where he said this, where he was railing against people basically who joined the LNC to keep an eye on it rather than to be this, I don't like collegiate bureaucratic little, hug club. And no, I used to tell people all the time, and people who've heard my interviews, well, I think I even said this on Tom Woods. It's like, I tell members, watch us like hawks. Don't ever trust the LNC. Watch how the sausage is made. I'm there when the sausage is made, and I wouldn't eat the fucking sausage. So just watch us like hawks. Don't say, oh, I trust my representatives. I don't trust me. Don't trust us ever. And that's the way it should be towards anybody in power, because power corrupts. It corrupts even libertarians. And that's the healthy attitude to have. And Joe was very, very scornful of that. And I think the majority of this LNC is very, very scornful of that. Like they think they're a better type of person, and they're not. Government is made up of, like, the government that we all hate is made up of people just like us.
Yep. That's the thing is, if we spent half the time going after the Republicans and Democrats that we do going after each other, we would be a lot further along in building this platform. But it was interesting because you're right. And political parties are interesting anyways, because you have the national party, you have the local parties, and then you have the candidates. And there's kind of a power struggle between the party and the candidates, right? I thought it was really interesting when JBH blocked Shane Hazel on Twitter the day before he resigned. I mean, you could see it coming. It's like, you're going to block one of your most outspoken candidates, and probably the most famous candidate you guys even had last year. He probably got more press than Joe Jorgensen did in the campaign last year, and then you block him on Twitter because he disagrees with you. That's kind of, to me, signal he was on his way out.
Well, and I since found out, though, it's from credible sources that I can't name, so it's not verified. But the same period of time when Gilletta said she was going to resign and someone called her and said, and it's that out-of-state person, there's another way. I learned that JBH was planning on resigning at the June LNC meeting, and then he changed his mind. I think he got the same phone call. But it was kind of the last ditch effort of the wokesters,
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the funny thing is I've joked about this too. I say, I think it comes with the pink hair dye. I'm a bit of an SJW myself. Like, I'm sympathetic to that point of view. And for me to be frustrated and over it says something. Because the dye has sunk into my brain a little bit, and I'm not like one of those, like, I don't even know the red pillars. I don't even know what you'd call it. I'm very like social justice myself, and I'm tired of it and see the havoc that's been done to the party.
But that goes along with it. I mean, if you're more of a social justice warrior, you want to call out corruption. It's the opposite type of social justice is what you see on like the left, for example, who wants government to do everything. You want lower government because you see the harm that government creates. Right. So you see the harm that, and that's the whole reason why it took me so long to join the party, is because it's a government agency. You don't trust it. You can never trust a party to uphold your values because you never know what's going on behind the scenes. And it's reassuring to have people like you and Josh and everything like that kind of watching things that are going on up there.
And yeah, there's something about it's power in general that you've got to be very, very careful when you get into these positions. And I think it's critically important to put people in these positions that don't trust institutional power. And part of the problem with the LNC is we're electing people that value the titles and value the institutional power. And even people who didn't start out that way, there's something that happens. And I could see how easy it is to happen. There's very, very often that it's so easy. The temptation to go along to get along is great, where I've found myself even at times being pulled by that. And I've said in the last year, and this is also one of the spiteful motivations for the removal motion, because I went after some fellow radicals. I say, I'm convinced that the LNC is where radicals go to die, because the two alleged self-professed radicals on the LNC are the worst. Their voting record is the absolute worst. And it's like, there's a joke in the Christian community. It's on that tape called Stuff Christians Like, which is just hilarious, where it said, the worst people to do business with are any of those that like have one of those Christian fish in their ads. It's like the minute you learn your roofer is a fellow Christian, you're like, oh, I'm screwed now. It's the same way now with the radicals on the LNC. Oh, a radical got elected to the LNC. We're screwed now, because they turn into the opposite of what they're supposed to be.
Well, you see it. It's the old notion that I've seen, because my background, I came from the right. I was a Tea Party conservative and everything like that. And the old notion is that there's something in the water in Washington, D.C. that once people get elected, they just they lose their values. I mean, it changes the way that they think about things. And it's exactly the same thing. It's like once you get that power, and like you said, the go along to get along, it's like once they get there, I mean, especially when Donald Trump got elected, it was like for the Republicans, it was like all those, I mean, other than, Thomas Massey and Rand Paul and Justin Amash, it was like everybody just fell in line. Ted Cruz, Dan Crenshaw, and all those people who were liberty-minded people just fell in line with this big government propaganda. It was like once
and Rand Paul did more than he should. He fell in line quite a bit too. Amash and Massey were the best.
Yeah, and Amash is now essentially with us, so and that's a positive aspect as well. He spoke a little bit when I was up in Michigan the second day, so it was really interesting. I like seeing the heads like Spike, Amash, and Dave Smith all kind of talking together. I mean, there was a day on Clubhouse where it was like the three of them, and it was really a great conversation. I wish that could be more the focus of the Libertarian Party instead of reading out corruption, because it was New Hampshire, but it was Pennsylvania first they were trying to not seat the Mises Caucus people, right? They were trying to not let them vote. Is that what happened in Pennsylvania?
Well, see, the funny thing is, and Pennsylvania set up me for New Hampshire in a way, because it gave me a certain credibility. I was parliamentarian for Pennsylvania and very well known to be Mises sympathetic. I'm not part of the caucus, but I disagree with them on their interpretation of what happened in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, it might have been uncollegiate. It might have been rude to your fellow LP members, but there was nothing shady at all about what they did. They followed their own rules, and anyone could have read those rules and prepared and joined the party before the seasoning period. I think it was a 6-month seasoning period. No one was stopping them. So no, they played by the rules. Again, it might have been a rude use of the rules, but it wasn't unethical. It wasn't shady. It wasn't corrupt. And I know that was the narrative immediately that the Mises people said. And I did a whole show on it, going through it. And I think I changed a lot of their minds. They go, yep, we should have been better prepared. But that gave me, I think, credibility in a lot of people's minds, because the temptation would have been to be just, yeah, you're right, they fucked you over. But no, that isn't what happened. And I try to, because my integrity is the only thing I have. So I try to call things as I see them, not how I'd like to see them, and not to what would be to my advantage or my self-interest. And my self-interest at that time would have been to throw the Pennsylvania chair under the bus, because I had a petty grudge against him. He was a good friend of mine, and he endorsed my opponent without even, like, he was a friend and didn't even bother to tell me. I've had to find out publicly. But no, he wasn't corrupt at convention. He did what I was sitting right next to him. So even though I had every incentive to throw him under the bus, I would not and did not.
Yeah, I think that is key. I guess I was missing that as well, is that they did everything under their bylaws. It's just it was that the rules are usually waived, and people usually just generally assume that those rules are going to be waived. But when you have the Mises Caucus coming in and saying we're going to basically stage a coup in the party and take over, that's exactly what the bylaws are set in motion for. More for people like the MAGA crowd or the groypers or whatever it is to come in and kind of steal the party. But I mean, that is what the bylaws are there for.
Right.
You can't, like you said, it's a lot different situation. It still got the same type of, it didn't get the same amount of press because it was under their bylaws.
And funny is, even I said this too, that night, like I went to the Mises party, and people, like, they're witnessed it. Like, I yelled at Heiss. I said, this is what the fucking takeover language got you. Are you happy? He was like, whoa, yeah. But it is. That's what happens. I don't like that language. I know what they mean by it. And what they mean by it, there's nothing wrong with. But, sometimes when you grab the bull, you get the horns. And that's what happened to them. And they bore the fruit of that language. But that's their choice, and that's fine. They think it benefits them more than it hurts. And that's their business. I'm not a member of that caucus. And all it did in Pennsylvania was delay it a year. And maybe it was for the best. Maybe they weren't ready in Pennsylvania. But now they know to follow the rules, to read the bylaws.
Yeah, and it should be every state needs to look at that and see what and know what the bylaws are and know what the rules are, because it's not a guarantee that those rules are going to be waived. Absolutely.
Well,
and you're right. I mean, that
to be able to waive a seasoning requirement is dumb, because if there's enough people there to take over your party, there's enough people there a lot of times to waive it. The whole purpose of a seasoning provision is to be a fail-safe that can't be waived. That's the whole point. So Pennsylvania's bylaws need a whole lot of, in my opinion, 6 months is too long, and it shouldn't be waived. It should be closer to 3 months and non-waivable, which I'm prejudiced. I tend to think Colorado does everything right. Ours is 90 days and non-waivable. So be like Colorado, you know.
Well, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, even Ryan's trying just to get rid of the provision here in Georgia. So I don't know.
It's a big mistake to get rid of a seasoning provision. Big mistake. It should be 90. I think 90 days, 30 to 90 days is reasonable. 6 months is way too long. But to not have it, you're gonna regret it. There's a reason why most states have them, and it all came about after the Howard Stern takeover in New York. And knowing a little bit of history will save you a lot of future grief. And I'd be more than willing to talk with any bylaws committee that's considering getting rid of it. National should have one, as far as I'm concerned.
Interesting. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not exactly sure. I thought he talked about either shortening it or
shortening it.
Getting rid of it.
Okay. But getting rid of it's a bad idea. You're good. Look, Virginia, you had Trumpsters taking over affiliates. Talk to Texas. Texas has takeover provisions. Attempted takeovers all the time. They're quite open from certain fringe conservative groups that either are like Texas cessationists, like that might have some sympathies to the LP, but don't like, maybe our social stances. They're very, anti-gay or something, or very bordertarian. And there's attempted takeovers all the time. You need to protect the party, and anti-takeover provisions are just good business.
That's good to know. So kind of switching directions and a little bit, and I know you said you're not part of any caucus, and this was kind of, you talked about this a little bit on Clubhouse about why you're not part of the caucus, if you want to explain that a little bit.
Okay, when I was regional representative for the first 2 years, I was a member of the Radical Caucus, a very active member. And I found at times the interests of the caucus were not the same as the interests of my region. And I was elected to represent my region, and that's what I would choose. And there's a lot of things. I make a lot of biblical references because I am a Christian, and there's a saying in the Bible that you can't serve two masters, and you can't represent the interests of a caucus and the interests of the party at the same time, because they're not always going to be aligned. Which is why I didn't rank. This has nothing to do with caucuses, but it's the same principle. Why I didn't rank Whitney Bilyeu high to be the replacement chair, because she was not going to resign from the chairmanship of Texas. Well, the interests of Texas are not always going to be the same as the interests of the national party. And it had nothing to do with the size of the job, because I hate when people try to tell me what time I have. I would never say, Whitney, you can't handle both jobs, because she's a grown-ass woman. She knows whether she can. It's not a matter of that. She could be the state chair of Delaware, a tiny little affiliate, and I still would be opposed, because the interests of Delaware are not always the interests of the national party. And who's she going to choose? And you tend to choose your home state. It just tends to be. I'm still very protective of Colorado, it's natural. So I found I was at odds with representing the two. And I didn't want to be answerable to the caucus. I needed to be answerable to my region. So I resigned the caucus when I ran for secretary, particularly because it was an officer position, which I felt was even a higher fiduciary duty to the national party. But it wasn't just that. I found, because I was such an outspoken advocate of the radical caucus, that a lot of the debates on the LNC ended up, instead of arguing with me, they were arguing with me as caucus member. Like, they would just bring up shit the caucus did that they didn't like. And like, all of a sudden, like, I had to answer for that. And it happens now with like Joshua with the Mises caucus.
Yeah.
To me, he should resign the Mises caucus while he's on the LNC, because it's not doing the Mises caucus any good, and it's not doing him any good. And like, it was even to the point where like Aaron Starr was like looking up who owned the radical caucus domains and stuff. It was just all this petty bullshit. And it's been so much better for everybody the minute I resigned the radical caucus and said no. And so my position has been, definitely officers should not be members of caucuses, but I don't think anyone on the LNC should be a member of a caucus. There could be a conflict, and the debates end up being about the caucus, and you decrease your effectiveness.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And going back to like, I've always found that caucuses were kind of weird, and this is really, until the Mises caucus, this is the first time I've actually heard of caucuses within the LP, because they are kind of, again, they're kind of weird for libertarians to be part of caucuses and stuff like that. And then now I'm starting to see just like caucuses more or less just seem to be like people that have the same interest in hobbies, like the wrestling caucus or the seafood caucus and stuff like that. So I mean, so those make sense, but the Mises caucus seems to be the most, actually the only one that's really even out there with talking values and everything like that. And it seems to be more your anarchists and your minarchists that are kind of helping to try to push those values onto most of the other rest of the party as well. And but they're also the loudest voices, right? I mean, they have the loudest voices on Twitter. They are the most strong-armed, I guess, and they're not afraid to offend people either.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of caucuses. I just think, the LNC shouldn't be involved with that. But and when I'm not in the LNC anymore, I will rejoin caucuses. I think they're very effective at getting towards a common goal. And again, I was very, very involved with the radical caucus. They just aren't particularly effective now. They were effective in 2016, but not anymore. They've kind of lost their direction, and the Mises caucus is the one getting things done right now.
Yep. Yeah, like I said, and this kind of goes to what the future of the party is and what it looks like, because I think a lot of libertarians shy away from stuff like how outspoken they are and how forceful they are with what they say. Like we spoke about, the uprising and we're going to take over the party type language. But when you start really looking at it, and I'm one of these people who I don't like to, I'm more of a finesse speaker. I like to get people over on values, right? But at some point in time, you don't win elections by being nice. I mean, Donald Trump proved that exponentially, right? You might not like what he had to say or how he behaved himself, but just it was effective.
And third party politics aren't the same as major party politics. And that's where I part ways with Justin Amash. Now, first of all, I want to say I respect him like immensely, from one whistleblower to another. Like, he stood up to Donald Trump. Like, yeah. Justin Amash is brave, and I respect bravery. I have no respect for cowards, but I think he's completely wrong in like his vision for the LP, because third party politics are not the same as major party politics. But I can disagree with him as to somebody like I highly respect, because he's got more courage than most people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like to use kind of like when it comes to even, I think a lot of a lot of it is that, like I said, tough talk and everything like that. And I think I like to use a hockey analogy. I'm from Michigan, so I'm a big hockey fan. And and everybody plays a role, right? You have finesse people who are your scorers and stuff like that. Somebody like Spike Cohen or Justin Amash, who are amazing speakers. And then you have somebody like Shane Hazel or something like that, who is just this in your face, enforcer. And that's kind of the same way as it is. You protect your finesse players and you get a lot of attention, but then once you get that attention, you prop them up, and that is who you push the message, who actually can get the message out there. And I think you need people like that in order to be able to go up against the DNC and the GOP.
And the thing is, how do you even broach this at times is, we don't have to get anywhere near a majority to change the direction of the country. If you look at any like major shifts that have happened, it's never been with great numbers of people, and people don't get inspired by tepid messaging. And Donald Trump really proved that. I mean, and authenticity matters. He was authentically awful most of the time, but he was who he was. Like, you knew what you were getting, and that wasn't politics as usual.
Yeah.
And I think we could learn a lesson from that. And like, we even see that playing on a really small scale in the LP, like with the shit that's going on with the LNC. All of the suits, all the rights people are so offended by some of the things I say. Like when I said that people who believe in COVID passports can go fuck themselves with a barbed dildo. They were so offended by that. Meanwhile, the average hoi polloi loved it. It's such a disconnect.
Absolutely. But part of the problem, I think, too, is we get so wrapped up into our echo chambers. Even and as much as I love watching, libertarian podcasts and listening to podcasts and stuff like that. It seems like the same people going over and over onto each other's channels, which is great. Like I'm having you on right now because we can talk about this type of stuff too. But I don't see enough of us branching out and actually talking to people that are part of the Democratic Party or Republicans and conservatives. I mean, conservatives are having a complete meltdown right now, and I don't see much libertarians going out there and really trying to pull people in, from that are being disenfranchised by the GOP, which it's a huge opportunity.
Well, and we are actively hostile right now to people leaving the GOP and coming into the LP, which is like so crazy. And it's usually the same people who say, oh, you just want to be a social club. And then when you see a Republican sniffing around that might be interested, you shoo them away. But they don't do the same to less libertarian leaning people who might be coming from the left. It's this weird identity crisis we have now. We were the complete opposite in 2008. In 2008, we were basically the happy hunting ground for the GOP. And if there was a Democrat sniffing around, we ran them off. And we need to like stop this whiplash that we do and be welcoming to anybody who's interested in liberty. Who cares where they came from? We all came from somewhere. I only know 2 second-generation libertarians, and one of them is great, Avens O'Brien, and the other one is awful, Nick Sarwark. So there's even being a second-generation libertarian's no guarantee. So most of us, except for those two, came from somewhere, and we need to stop being hostile to those who are coming in, like we were talking before about Caitlyn Jenner. No, she's not perfect on all of the issues, but none of us were when we first came in.
Exactly.
But does she have the good Liberty Foundation? Yes, I think the LP should be actively courting Caitlyn Jenner.
I absolutely agree, and that's what we were talking about before, because I was on Elijah Schaffer's Slightly Offensive on the Blaze TV last Friday, and I was preaching the same stuff. 28% of the LGBT voted for Donald Trump. There's 18 million people in the LGBT community that we could be trying to get over to our side, and 28% of those voted for Donald Trump. So it is really interesting, and I said it on there that we would love to have those votes. But if our party is just going to come and be like, no, you came from this side or you came from that side. We don't want you in the party. And then at the same time, we see like when Joe ran that stuff about BLM last year, then the party gets accused of pandering to the left or pandering to the right instead of trying to see what's really going on and trying to actually bring people onto our side, because we have to pull from both sides, and we do. A lot of people think that, you know, if we weren't voting, a lot of, you know, GOP people think that if we're not voting for them, we're voting for Libertarian. It's like all of our votes should go to them, but that's not how our makeup is. Our makeup is across the broad spectrum, and it's just a lot of people just can't fathom as to how diverse our community actually is.
And it's now the statistics I have are older. I'd like to see something more current, but on average, people who vote for Libertarian candidates, it's about a 60-40 split. It is slight. They would have voted slightly more for GOP candidates, but it's certainly not 100%. And not even all of them would have voted at all. Like me, if not for a Libertarian candidate, I wouldn't vote at all. So it's not like the GOP would get my vote. And people really, really do underestimate how many, if there wasn't a Libertarian candidate, how many people would have voted for either an independent or a Democrat candidate. We still have that. And I think part of the why we shoo away Republicans is we're very self-conscious about that reputation. And we're so in agony to shed that we're just pot smoking Republicans, that we run off interested Republicans that are looking to party switch. And yeah, we need to cut that out. In my opinion, we shouldn't be running off anybody.
Yeah, and that's what I found interesting, especially about the elections here in Georgia in 2020, because I think a lot of people would have had a lot of Shane Hazel's voters going to David Perdue, but that didn't happen. And you start looking at the numbers, you look at when Joe got 1.3% of the vote here in Georgia, Jorgensen got 1.3%. Joe Biden won the state. And while Shane Hazel got 3.4% of the vote in Georgia, David Perdue got 48% of that. So where did those votes actually come from? I mean, when you really started looking at it, you could tell that, you know, David Perdue was not going to win that election unless, you know, Libertarians switched their vote from Joe Biden to David Perdue, because a lot of those people voted for Joe Biden and then voted for Shane Hazel on the down ballots. You can just see it from the main, just basic look at it. So I absolutely think that a lot of people, they don't understand that, Libertarian candidates, they won't vote. They won't come out for you if you don't inspire them. You know, voters will not come out for you. And I think that's, I think that hurts our party more than anything, because people are so willing to jump ship. I mean, I think a lot of what Jo Jorgensen did, I thought she had a great message, but there was a couple slip ups, but one or two slip ups, and, you know, the entire party kind of jumped ship, right? I mean, a lot of anarchists are going to jump ship when they think that you're trying to pander to the left or trying to get like BLM votes and stuff like that. Whereas I think it's Larry Sharp's rule, the 80-20 rule, where you probably agreed with her over 80% of the time. You should probably vote for
her. And I think Larry is right, but he's missing something, and that explains it more. Is if you, it seems logical on paper that if you agree more than you disagree, but you already know she's not going to win. So why should you compromise on anything for a losing proposition? You'll lose when you know, yes. But the minute it's like, what? And it's all part of a good friend of mine, Mark Montoni, wrote an article called "Why Hold Back If You're Not Going to Win?" And why pander if you're not going to win? Like, the two old parties are great at pandering. And at least if you go and like sell your soul a little bit for them, at least you're going to get something out of it. But why? The reason people got so upset, because they already felt like, listen, we're already on a sinking ship with you, and you're gonna like feed us rotten fish. That's why I think we don't understand, and why I don't think the 80-20 rule really it's not it doesn't work in third party politics all the time. It might work to convince people to join the party, but not necessarily to vote for the candidate.
That's a good point. That's a really good point, I think. I think that's a good point to probably end this on as well. So, again, yeah, thanks for coming on. This has been a great conversation, and I can't wait to continue to have these conversations with you and other people as well.
Hey, well, thank you so much. I hope you have an awesome day.
Yeah, where can people find you at?
Oh God. Besides on the chopping block on the LNC, I have my YouTube channel as well, Pink Flame of Liberty. And because I still haven't found another job, I've been broadcasting nearly daily, and it's really LP inside baseball stuff. So that's the main place.
Awesome. And make sure you guys go and subscribe to this channel as well. And we will be back here pretty soon with another amazing guest. Thanks again.
All right, awesome.